The air was thick with tension in the human command bunker as the first wave of alien ships descended over Earth's atmosphere. Screens flashed with data, but it was the images of the ships themselves that stole the breath of every officer in the room. Sleek, metallic, and almost seamless in their design, these alien crafts defied known physics. Hovering above cities and military installations, they seemed to mock humanity's feeble attempts at resistance. Colonel Mark Trenton, a hardened veteran with decades of service, watched in silence as feeds from across the globe displayed similar scenes. Towering alien ships looming ominously over Earth's most advanced weaponry. Satellite lasers had been fired, missiles launched, all without even scratching the enemy hulls. "They've come to laugh at us," muttered Captain Renee Harker, Trenton's second in command. Her voice was steady, but the anger beneath her calm facade was unmistakable. "It's like they're here just to watch us flail." Trenton gave a grim nod. It was hard to argue with her. Every attempt at defense had been countered or rendered useless by alien technology. Yet there was something about the calculated patience of the aliens that gnawed at him. This wasn't just an invasion, it was a spectacle. Just then, a high-ranking official from the United Nations entered the room, looking visibly shaken. "Colonel, we're initiating protocol blackout," he announced, his voice laced with urgency. Trenton's face darkened. Protocol blackout was Earth's last resort. Full radio silence, total withdrawal of civilian presence in strategic areas, and a rallying of the world's remaining military assets. The protocol had been devised in theory, but never executed. "We expected an attack like this but not the mockery," Trenton said, his voice a low growl. In silence, the room filled with determination. Orders were issued, and soldiers moved swiftly. Civilians were evacuated, and the military retreated to the most fortified bunkers. From the outside, it looked like Earth was surrendering, but behind the scenes, a new strategy was forming. In the quiet that followed, Trenton turned to Harker with a steely look. "Have they started to underestimate us yet?" Harker's mouth curved into a tight smile. "Oh, they think we're defeated, Colonel, and we'll let them keep thinking that." For days, the aliens hovered, surveying Earth's emptied cities with apparent satisfaction. No more attacks were launched. No humans dared to approach. And then, on the seventh day, as the alien ships finally began to descend, moving closer to ground level as if to examine the territory they thought they had conquered, a low rumbling echoed across the landscape. The aliens, confident in their technological superiority, had never anticipated what came next. Across plains, cities, and mountains, hulking shadows began to emerge. Massive tanks, dormant for years, rolled out of hidden bunkers, their armored hulls bristling with weapons specifically crafted for this moment. The human army had been hiding in plain sight, and now, with the element of surprise on their side, they were ready to strike back. The alien ships, hovering mere meters above Earth's cities, began to hum ominously as they detected the sudden surge of energy from below. Their silver hulls rippled like water, emitting a faint glow as they prepared for what seemed like a simple display of force. To them, this was routine. To humanity, it was do or die, from the cover of crumbling skyscrapers and deserted highways. The first wave of human tanks emerged, their designs a fusion of Earth's oldest and most advanced engineering. They were giants, bristling with reinforced steel plating, automated targeting systems, and weapons that had been shrouded in secrecy for years. Inside the lead tank, Colonel Trenton monitored the screens as they lit up with enemy positions. The night vision display showed the alien crafts outlined in sharp green relief. Trenton's fingers hovered over the controls, then clenched into a fist. "They think we're easy prey," he muttered. "Sir, all units are in position." Captain Harker's voice crackled over the comms. She was stationed in one of the central command tanks, a state-of-the-art behemoth with a firepower that could wipe out a city block in seconds. "We're ready for your signal." Trenton looked around at the soldiers in his tank. Their faces were tense, every eye fixed on him. Some had been in battle before, but none of them had faced an enemy that seemed invincible. They were trained to fight and prepared to die, but tonight, they held on to a quiet hope. Maybe, just maybe, their preparations had not been in vain. Tonight, they learned that humans don't surrender. he said, his voice resonating through the silence. Tonight, we fight back. With a swift movement, he pressed the command button, sending the signal to strike. Across the landscape, the tanks roared to life. They opened fire with a coordinated assault that shook the ground, sending a barrage of electromagnetic charges, plasma rounds, and kinetic missiles tearing through the air. The aliens hadn't been expecting resistance, much less an attack of this scale. The first wave of missiles slammed into the alien crafts, sparking fierce explosions. For the first time, cracks appeared along the ship's shimmering surfaces, and a bright green fluid, strange and luminous, leaked from the damaged areas. "Direct hits, sir." Harker's voice rang with a mixture of exhilaration and disbelief. "They're not as untouchable as they look." But Trenton's expression didn't soften. He knew better than to celebrate too soon. The damaged ships began to regroup, their formations shifting with a terrifying speed. The shimmering surfaces of the crafts seemed to ripple again as they initiated a rapid repair process, sealing some of the smaller cracks even as human forces continued to batter them with everything they had. "Don't let up," Trenton ordered, his eyes locked on the main display. He watched as alien ships hovered lower, a tactic that exposed their vulnerable undersides, but also brought them dangerously close to the tanks. It was a deadly gamble on both sides. Each attack could either break the enemy or leave Earth's forces exposed. One alien ship, heavily damaged but still airborne, suddenly opened fire, launching a blast of energy that disintegrated 2 tanks on impact. The heat and force of the explosion reverberated across the battlefield, and the soldiers in the remaining tanks gritted their teeth, pushing forward even harder. Trenton adjusted his targeting system to lock onto the alien ship responsible. "Harker, flank them from the east. Take them by surprise. Don't give them room to recover." "Yes, sir," came her reply, and soon her tank unit broke formation, veering to the right and navigating the rubble-strewn streets of the city to get behind the alien ships. In a matter of minutes, Harker's tanks opened fire from their new vantage point. Plasma rounds and EMP bursts hit the alien craft from below, tearing into the soft metal underside that couldn't withstand the force. The ship sputtered, its glow dimming as it lost altitude, crashing with a thunderous explosion into the street below. A cheer erupted across the comms as soldiers celebrated the first alien ship brought down by human forces. For the first time in days, the humans dared to believe that victory might be within reach. But then, a cold synthetic voice echoed across every communication channel, a voice unlike anything human ears had ever heard. It was speaking in English, each word meticulously pronounced, but there was no mistaking the disdain laced in every syllable. "Resistance is meaningless. You fight with sticks and stones against gods." A shiver ran down Trenton's spine. This wasn't just any alien invasion. They understood humans, their language, their tactics. These were no ordinary conquerors, and they were something far more calculating. Trenton leaned into the comm, his tone defiant. "You may think you're gods, but down here, we make gods bleed," the voice replied with chilling calmness. "Then bleed with us." Before he could respond, Trenton watched in horror as new alien ships descended, these larger and reinforced with a thick, pulsing armor. Their weapon systems began to charge, aimed directly at the tanks that had dared to defy them. The battle was far from over, and now the human forces were outnumbered and outgunned. But the line had been drawn. Earth would fight. And if the aliens wanted blood, humanity was ready to give it. Silence stretched across the comms as the new wave of alien ships loomed above the battlefield, their massive shadows casting an eerie twilight over the tanks below. These crafts were unlike the first, enormous, armored with pulsing, veined plating that seemed alive, flexing with a menacing red glow. Their weapons hummed with energy, signaling a level of firepower that was far beyond anything Earth had encountered. Trenton's heart pounded as he surveyed the battlefield. His mind raced, calculating every possible move, every weak spot he could exploit. But the truth was hard to ignore. They had barely managed to disable one ship, and these reinforcements looked impenetrable. "Colonel," Captain Harker's voice cut through the static, calm but underscored with worry. "We've got new data. Scanners are showing high-density shielding on these new ships. Conventional rounds won't do it. We'll need everything we've got." Trenton didn't hesitate. "Initiate firestorm protocol. Unleash everything." He knew that activating Firestorm meant deploying experimental weapons never before tested in real combat. There was no telling what might happen, but hesitation was a luxury they couldn't afford. All units, load fusion rounds and prepare plasma cannons, he ordered, his voice steady. And remember, this is what you signed up for. Make every shot count. Around him, soldiers exchanged determined looks as they armed their tanks with the deadliest ammunition they had, weapons so volatile that a single error in handling could destroy them. But none of them showed hesitation. These were Earth's last defenders, and they were ready to face whatever it took. At Trenton's signal, the tanks unleashed a storm of fusion rounds and plasma blasts, illuminating the battlefield in an inferno of red and white flames. The explosions tore into the ship's shielding with a brutal force, pushing their defenses to the limit. For a moment, it seemed as though the shields might give way. A massive explosion shook the ground as one of the alien ships took a direct hit to its propulsion core. The core sputtered and fractured, sending the ship spinning out of control, hurtling toward the ground. It crashed with a force that split the earth beneath it, sending tremors that rocked the tanks and soldiers nearby. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining alien crafts reconfigured, adjusting to the human assault with disturbing efficiency. Their weapon systems recalibrated, and within seconds, a blinding wave of energy shot down from above, disintegrating 2 tanks instantly. The men and women who had been inside had no time to react. "Damn it," Harker's voice erupted in frustration. "They're learning. Every shot. They're learning." Trenton clenched his fists, trying to steady his breathing. "Then let's make it a lesson they won't forget." The ground shook again as more tanks fired, but the alien ships responded in kind, their blasts shredding through Earth's forces with ruthless precision. The ships were relentless, advancing as if they had calculated every movement, every shot. In mere minutes, they had torn a path through half of the human defenses, leaving wreckage and ash in their wake. In the command tank, Trenton scanned the screens, searching for any sign of weakness, any vulnerability he could exploit. His eyes fell on the glowing cores within the alien crafts, which pulsed with each energy blast. It was a long shot, but if they could manage a direct hit on those cores, they might have a chance. "Harker," he barked into the comm, "target their cores. Focus everything on those weak spots." "Copy that, Colonel," she replied, rallying the remaining tanks around her. The tanks regrouped, forming a staggered line and aiming their guns directly at the alien cores. One by one, they fired, each shot a calculated strike to penetrate the enemy's defenses. As rounds found their marks, several ships began to falter, their cores sparking wildly before erupting in blasts that ripped through their armor. One of the massive crafts finally imploded, crashing to the ground with a deafening roar. But even as the human forces managed these small victories, the alien reinforcements kept coming. Each destroyed ship was replaced by 2 more, descending from the skies with ruthless precision. The ground trembled as the alien crafts fired relentlessly, tearing apart the battlefield and leaving craters where tanks had once stood. Trenton's tank shuddered as a blast struck dangerously close. "We're running out of time," he muttered, his mind racing. They couldn't keep fighting a battle of attrition. The aliens would simply overwhelm them. He needed a plan that could turn the tide, and fast. Just then, a crackling transmission came through the comms. A message from Command Center Omega, an off-the-books facility hidden deep beneath the earth. "Colonel Trenton, this is General Lopez," the voice said, low and urgent. "We're authorizing the release of Project Artemis." Trenton's pulse quickened. Project Artemis was a last resort protocol, a high-stakes gambit that had been in development for years. Designed to harness Earth's most experimental weaponry, it was as dangerous as it was untested, but at this point, they had nothing left to lose. "Copy that, General. We'll deploy Artemis," Trenton replied, his voice hardening. He knew the risks. The weapon could save them, or it could obliterate everything in its path. "Harker," he said over the comms, his tone final. "We're activating Project Artemis. Pull all remaining units to the fallback perimeter and prepare for an evacuation if this fails." "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice filled with a fierce resolve. As the tanks began their withdrawal, Trenton keyed in the codes to activate Artemis. The ground below rumbled as deep within hidden bunkers, Immense platforms began to rise, each one loaded with a weapon that looked like a cross between a cannon and a colossal drill. These were the Artemis devices, weapons capable of ripping through the alien armor with concentrated blasts of energy strong enough to destabilize matter itself. The alien crafts, sensing the shift in energy, halted their advance. Their systems recalculated, attempting to identify the new threat, but they were too late. The first Artemis weapon fired, sending a beam of crackling blue energy directly into the nearest alien craft. The ship's armor resisted for a split second before it shattered, splitting the vessel into fragments that rained down in a fiery arc. Across the battlefield, the other Artemis devices roared to life, each one targeting a different alien ship. The sky filled with explosions as one ship after another fell under the devastating assault. For the first time, the aliens hesitated, their formations faltering as they tried to retreat. In the command tank, Trenton watched the screens as the alien forces crumbled. "We did it," he whispered, a spark of hope igniting within him. But just as he allowed himself a breath of relief, his screens flashed red with a warning. From high above, far beyond Earth's atmosphere, something even larger was descending. It was a ship. No, a fortress, larger than anything humanity had ever seen, and it was heading directly for them. The massive alien fortress descended slowly, casting a dark shadow across miles of scorched earth. Every soldier on the battlefield stopped, staring up in mute horror at the titanic craft overhead. Compared to this, the other ships looked like mere drones. Its sheer size blotted out the horizon, and its surface was covered with spires, domes, and glowing fissures that seemed to pulsate with otherworldly energy. It wasn't just a warship, it was a world unto itself, a mobile city of death. Colonel Trenton's voice came over the comms, hard and controlled despite the shock. "All units, fall back to secondary positions, prioritize civilian safety, and get ready for a full-scale assault." He looked over his soldiers in the command tank, who were ashen but resolute. They had faced the unimaginable tonight, and yet, here they were, still standing. Captain Harker's voice crackled over the comms. "Sir, we're picking up abnormal energy readings from the fortress. Looks like they're preparing a superweapon. Whatever it is, it'll wipe us out in one hit." Trenton clenched his jaw. Then we don't give them that chance. He knew they couldn't rely on brute force against something this powerful. The Artemis weapons had already spent their energy reserves, and they had no way to recharge them fast enough. They'd have to improvise, to outthink the enemy. "Lieutenant Girov, bring up the fortress schematics," he ordered, watching as a rough outline of the alien fortress filled the screen. The fortress's hull was heavily armored, but deep within, he could see a network of energy conduits branching out from a central core. "That core," Trenton murmured, a plan forming in his mind. "If we can breach those energy conduits, we might be able to overload it." Harker's voice came in, skeptical but hopeful. "Sir, if you're saying we can force an overload, that means getting past layers of alien defenses. It'll be suicide for anyone who gets too close." "I know," Trenton replied grimly. "But it's our only shot." He took a breath, steeling himself. "I'll lead a team in. We'll use the old tunnels below the city to get as close as possible and set up charges near the core conduits." The silence that followed his words was heavy. Every soldier knew what this meant. But before anyone could speak, Harker's voice cut through the comms. "Sir, you're not going alone. I'll take Bravo unit and provide backup." Trenton paused, a surge of gratitude filling him. "Thank you, Captain. Bravo unit, prepare for infiltration. We move in 5. The ground units began repositioning, securing the perimeter while Trenton and Harker led their teams into the network of abandoned tunnels that stretched beneath the city. These tunnels, built decades ago as an emergency network, had long since fallen into disuse. Now, they would serve as Earth's last line of resistance. The atmosphere in the tunnel was thick and damp, each echoing footstep a reminder of how close they were to death. The only light came from their dim flashlights as they made their way through. Silent, but alert, the walls vibrated with the distant sounds of battle above them. But here, in the shadows, a deadly calm prevailed. Trenton kept his focus on the mission, his mind racing through the possibilities. If they could just reach the core and plant the charges, There was a chance, however slim, they could destabilize the fortress from within. And if it worked, they might just buy humanity the time it needed to regroup and rebuild. After nearly an hour of navigating through the tunnels, they reached a steel grate that led up into the open ground just beneath the fortress. Trenton signaled for everyone to halt, scanning the area with infrared. Alien guards patrolled above, their strange armor and shifting weapons marking them as elite enforcers. They moved with mechanical precision, sweeping their surroundings with a cold, unfeeling focus. "Looks like they've got the place locked down," Harker whispered, her voice barely audible. Trenton nodded, his eyes narrowing. "We're going to need a distraction. Harker, take half the team and move around to the west side. On my signal, start a diversion and draw their fire. We'll take advantage of the chaos to move in." Harker nodded, giving him a brief but determined smile. "See you on the other side, Colonel." With a final salute, she and her team disappeared into the shadows. Trenton waited, every nerve on edge, until the faint sound of gunfire erupted in the distance. The alien guards immediately shifted, responding with blinding speed to the diversion. "Move now," Trenton ordered, and his team surged forward, slipping past the main defenses and entering a corridor lined with the fortress's energy conduits. The air hummed with power, and the walls pulsed with a strange, rhythmic glow, almost like the fortress itself was alive. They sprinted down the corridor, moving quickly to avoid detection, until they reached the first of the conduits. Trenton motioned to his demolitions expert, a young but sharp-witted soldier named Carver. "Set the charges here. Maximum yield. We need to blow this thing wide open." As Carver worked, sweat beading on his brow, the rest of the team took up defensive positions, weapons trained on the corridor ahead. Trenton's heart pounded as he watched the timer count down on the charges. They had 1 minute to set each detonation before the fortress's automated defenses locked onto them. Just as Carver finished arming the final charge, a metallic screech echoed from down the corridor. The alien guards had discovered them, their armored forms glinting in the dim light as they rushed forward, weapons raised. "Hold the line," Trenton shouted, opening fire. The corridor exploded into chaos as both sides exchanged fire, each shot echoing like thunder in the confined space. The alien guards were relentless, advancing despite the barrage. Their armor absorbed most of the bullets, forcing the humans to aim for the narrow gaps and joints, the only places vulnerable to attack. One guard got close, launching a blade from his arm that nearly grazed Trenton's head. He ducked, grabbing a fallen weapon and firing it at point-blank range. The alien staggered back, a flicker of surprise in its eyes before it collapsed. 10 seconds left on the charges," Carver yelled, his voice strained as he held off another attacker. "Fall back," Trenton ordered. "Get to the next checkpoint." The team retreated, ducking through side passages as the explosives detonated behind them. The blast rocked the fortress, tearing through the conduits and sending a wave of fiery destruction through the alien core. They could hear the screams of the aliens as the shockwaves reverberated through the fortress. As they reached the safety of a maintenance shaft, Trenton glanced back, catching sight of the fortress's core in full view. Flames licked around the shattered conduits, and for a moment, he dared to believe they had done it. But then, an unearthly wail echoed through the corridors, chilling them to the bone. The fortress had activated an emergency protocol, and it was beginning to repair itself, the broken conduits reconnecting as thick, glowing tendrils stretched from the walls, sealing the wounds. Harker's voice came over the comms, grim and defiant. "Colonel, we've only got one shot left. If we can get to the primary core and hit it hard enough, we might destabilize the entire fortress." Trenton's jaw tightened. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." He looked at his team. Exhaustion and determination etched into their faces. They had lost too much to turn back now. As they pressed forward, deeper into the heart of the fortress, Trenton couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something vast and ancient, something that had been waiting for this moment. They would find out soon enough. The team moved swiftly, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the alien fortress with a renewed sense of urgency. The fortress's self-repair systems were working at a terrifying pace, sealing the damage from their last detonation and reactivating defensive protocols. The broken conduits they'd left behind were already patching themselves with strange, tendril-like fibers that glowed ominously. Colonel Trenton led the way, his face set in a hard mask of determination. They were deep inside enemy territory, and retreat was no longer an option. Reaching the primary core, nestled in the center of the fortress, was their only hope. If they could destroy it, it would trigger a chain reaction that might be enough to bring the entire fortress down. "Captain Harker, report," Trenton barked into his comm as they approached a massive chamber lined with pulsating energy cables. Each cable looked like a vein, throbbing with alien energy as it fed into the fortress's central systems. "We're holding position at your flank, sir," Harker's voice replied, filled with grit and exhaustion. "Lost 2 of ours getting past their sentries, but Bravo unit is in position and ready to back you up." "Understood. Keep your team steady. We'll need all the cover we can get once we reach the core," Trenton said, his voice calm but laced with tension. He signaled his squad forward. They crept along the edge of the chamber, weapons at the ready, their breaths barely audible as they scanned the surroundings. The fortress was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery the only sound. They knew the silence was temporary. Any second now, the alien forces would discover their location. As they advanced, they came upon a vast, circular door lined with alien symbols that glowed faintly. Beyond this door was the core, the heart of the fortress and the source of the energy that powered its weapons and defenses. "Carver," Trenton said, signaling to the demolitions expert, "we need this door open. Fast." Carver nodded, already kneeling to inspect the locking mechanism. He worked swiftly, his fingers moving with practiced precision, but his hands trembled slightly. "Colonel, this tech, it's like nothing I've seen before. It's almost like it's alive." Trenton clenched his jaw. "Then treat it like any other threat. Get that door open, or we'll be the ones it kills." Just as Carver was about to trigger the final override, an alarm blared through the fortress, a sharp grating sound that made the soldiers wince. Red lights pulsed along the walls, and a distant rumble signaled that alien reinforcements were on their way. "Colonel, we've got incoming," Harker's voice warned over the comm. "Looks like an entire squadron is heading your way. We'll hold them off as long as we can." "Hurry it up, Carver," Trenton urged, watching the corridor they'd come from as the shadows shifted and the sound of alien footfalls echoed ominously. "I'm working as fast as I can," Carver hissed, his voice tense. He made one final adjustment, and the circular door began to creak open, revealing the massive core chamber beyond. The core itself hung suspended in the center, a pulsing spherical mass of alien technology that radiated heat and light. Energy flowed through it in complex patterns, like lightning trapped in a cage. "Move! Get inside!" Trenton ordered, and his team rushed through the door, sealing it behind them just as alien soldiers rounded the corner. Trenton could hear the pounding on the door as the aliens tried to break through. But for the moment, they were safe. The team spread out around the core chamber, setting up a perimeter and preparing for the final assault. Trenton's eyes locked onto the core, a mix of awe and dread filling him. It was beautiful and terrifying, a piece of technology far beyond human comprehension. Destroying it wouldn't be easy. "Harker, we're in position," Trenton said into his comm. "You'll need to hold the line outside. We're setting charges now." "Copy that, sir," Harker replied, her voice steady despite the strain. "We'll give you as much time as we can." Trenton turned to Carver. "Set the charges around the core. We'll go for maximum yield. This fortress goes down, or we die trying." Carver and the other demolitions experts moved quickly, securing explosives at key points around the core. The heat was nearly unbearable, the air thick with energy that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Every second felt like an eternity as they worked, each movement careful, every glance over their shoulder filled with the fear that the aliens would breach the door at any moment. Just as they finished placing the last charge, the door they'd sealed began to buckle under the pressure from the alien forces outside. They had seconds left, maybe less. "Charges are set, Colonel," Carver said, his face slick with sweat. He looked at Trenton, his eyes wide with the mixture of fear and determination. "We'd better move." Trenton nodded, his voice low but fierce. "All units, prepare for extraction. Set timers on the charges. 30 seconds. He turned to the rest of the team, who had taken up defensive positions around the core. "This is it. Hold the line until the last second, then fall back. If anyone falls behind, but before he could finish, the doors exploded inward, and a wave of alien soldiers poured into the chamber. They moved with a ruthless efficiency, their armor reflecting the light of the core as they advanced, weapons trained on the human soldiers. "Fire!" Trenton shouted, and his team unleashed a torrent of bullets, plasma rounds, and grenades, filling the chamber with the roar of gunfire and explosions. The aliens retaliated with deadly precision, their weapons tearing through the human ranks as they pressed forward. Trenton's gun jammed, and he dropped it, grabbing a fallen soldier's plasma rifle and continuing to fire as he backed toward the core. He could see his team being forced back, the relentless alien forces closing in on all sides. The charge's timer ticked down to 10 seconds. They were out of time. "Fall back. Now," Trenton ordered, his voice barely audible over the chaos. One by one, the remaining soldiers began to retreat toward the far exit, covering each other as they went. Trenton stayed at the back, firing in bursts to give his team as much cover as possible. The aliens were relentless, but he could see the door, freedom, just within reach. As he reached the exit, he saw Carver stumble, hit by an alien round. Without thinking, Trenton turned back, grabbing Carver and hauling him toward the door, even as the charges ticked down to 3, 2, 1. A deafening explosion tore through the chamber, the shockwave hurling Trenton and Carver through the exit and down a long, sloping corridor. The fortress shook violently, and behind them, a blinding flash of light erupted as the core began to destabilize. The walls cracked, and chunks of metal and debris fell from the ceiling as the fortress started to collapse. Trenton struggled to his feet, pulling Carver up beside him. The remaining soldiers were sprinting down the corridor, desperately trying to escape before the entire structure came down around them. "This place is coming apart." Harker's voice crackled over the comm, her own unit struggling to retreat under heavy fire. "Colonel, we're not going to make it if we don't get a miracle." Trenton pushed forward, half carrying, half dragging Carver as they raced through the collapsing fortress. Just as the ceiling began to cave in above them, he saw a faint light ahead, an emergency exit. Summoning the last of his strength, he pushed himself and Carver toward it, praying they'd make it out alive. They burst through the exit just as the fortress collapsed behind them, the structure imploding with a thunderous roar. Trenton and the remaining soldiers stumbled into the open air, coughing and gasping for breath as they watched the alien fortress crumble into a heap of twisted metal and smoke. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, there was silence, and then a low, ominous rumble filled the air. From the smoldering ruins, a shape began to emerge, massive, serpentine, and covered in the same alien armor as the fortress. This was no ordinary enemy. It was a creature, a final weapon the aliens had hidden within their fortress, a leviathan that seemed impervious to everything they had thrown at it. Trenton looked on in horror as the creature lifted its head, a pair of glowing red eyes fixing on him with a cold, deadly intelligence. The fight was far from over. And now, they faced something beyond their worst nightmares. The alien leviathan rose from the ruins of the fortress, its massive, armored form twisting and towering above the battlefield. Its skin, if it could even be called that, was an amalgam of metal and muscle, pulsing with an eerie red light that seemed to run like blood beneath its armored plates. The creature's head was shaped like a grotesque amalgamation of machinery and flesh, with rows of gleaming metallic teeth and two soulless red eyes that scanned the landscape with cold malice. Trenton stood frozen for a split second, staring at the towering beast. It was beyond anything they had prepared for, a monstrous weapon of war, engineered with a terrifying intelligence and designed for one purpose: to obliterate all who stood against it. "Colonel, we're reading massive energy levels coming from that thing," Captain Harker's voice cut through the comm, barely concealing her shock. "It's emitting radiation that's disrupting all our systems. Conventional weapons will have little effect on something this big." Trenton clenched his fists, his mind racing. The Artemis weapons were depleted, and their tanks were severely outmatched. His team was scattered, wounded, and exhausted, but retreat was no longer an option. If they didn't stop this creature here, it would rampage across the planet, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. "Listen up," he said, his voice grim and steady. "This is our last stand. We need to find its weak spot, and if it has one, aim for anything that glows, anything that looks exposed. Focus all fire on those areas, and do not stop until this thing is down." The soldiers took position, their eyes hardening with resolve. Across the battlefield, the remaining tanks and ground units aimed their weapons at the Leviathan. Every soldier prepared to give their life if it meant stopping this final threat. The Leviathan let out an earth-shaking roar, its mouth opening to reveal a dark, pulsing core within its throat. With horrifying speed, it reared back and unleashed a blast of pure energy. A column of searing light that cut through the air and slammed into the ground, incinerating everything in its path. Several tanks were instantly obliterated, the shockwave ripping through the ranks and throwing soldiers off their feet. "Hold the line," Trenton shouted, forcing himself to his feet even as the ground trembled. "Stay focused. Target that core in its throat. If it can fire from there, that's where we hit." Captain Harker, bruised and bloodied but unyielding, adjusted her aim. "Bravo unit, lock onto that core. Fire on my mark." The remaining tanks and soldiers synchronized their fire, unleashing a barrage of missiles, plasma rounds, and high-caliber bullets aimed directly at the creature's exposed core. Explosions rippled across its body, and for a moment, it staggered back, the light in its throat flickering as the impacts tore into its flesh. But the Leviathan only roared in fury, as if each hit was little more than an irritation. It swung its massive tail, knocking over a row of tanks like toys, sending them flying through the air. Trenton and his team barely dodged in time as the tail crashed into the ground, leaving a crater in its wake. "We're not even slowing it down," one soldier muttered, his voice filled with dread. Trenton's gaze flicked to the creature's legs, where he noticed a faint glow around its joints. The same red, pulsing light that ran beneath its armor. "Aim for the joints," he ordered, seizing on the slim chance that they could at least cripple its mobility. "If we can bring it down, we might have a chance." The soldiers redirected their fire, focusing on the creature's knees and ankles, their rounds slamming into the joints with pinpoint precision. The Leviathan faltered, one of its legs buckling slightly as an explosion tore through the exposed tissue beneath the armor. It was a small victory, but it was enough to rally the human forces. Trenton watched as the Leviathan stumbled, its balance momentarily compromised. "Keep hitting those joints. Don't let it recover." As the soldiers concentrated their fire, the Leviathan snarled in pain, the red glow beneath its skin intensifying as it struggled to stay upright. For the first time, the monstrous creature seemed vulnerable, its movements becoming slower, more erratic. But then, something horrifying happened. The creature's red eyes flashed, and a new layer of armor began to cover the damaged areas, sealing the wounds almost instantly. It was adapting, its body repairing itself as quickly as they could damage it. "Oh no, it's healing itself." Harker's voice was filled with disbelief. "We'll never take it down at this rate." Desperation clawed at Trenton's mind. They couldn't compete with something that could repair itself on the battlefield. They needed more power, more firepower than any tank, cannon, or missile they had left. His gaze shifted to the Artemis platforms, now dark and lifeless, scattered across the battlefield where they'd first deployed them. An idea hit him, reckless but potent. "Harker," he called, "get me a connection to Command Center Omega." Seconds later, the line buzzed to life. "Colonel Trenton, this is General Lopez. What's your status?" "General, I need authorization to reinitiate the Artemis platforms remotely. We'll overload them, redirect their energy cores into a chain reaction." There was a pause, the gravity of Trenton's request hanging in the air. "You realize, Colonel, that would turn the Artemis platforms into bombs. You'll have no time to escape." Trenton's voice was resolute. "It's the only way to bring this thing down. We're out of options." General Lopez's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Understood, Colonel. Authorization granted. Godspeed." The comm went silent. Trenton took a deep breath, steeling himself. He patched into the Artemis platform's controls, setting them to overload one by one. The ground beneath them hummed as the platforms powered back up, their energy cores flashing as they prepared to go critical. "Harker, get the team clear. Trenton ordered, his voice low. "We're going to blow the entire field." "Sir? You're not staying behind, are you?" Harker's voice was tight with emotion, the weight of realization hitting her. "This is the only way, Captain," Trenton replied, forcing calm into his voice. "Get our people to safety. I'll handle the detonation." For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then Harker's voice came through, choked but steady. "It's been an honor, sir." Trenton nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Likewise, Harker, now go." As Harker's unit retreated, Trenton keyed in the final override. The Artemis platforms began to vibrate, each one pulsing with blinding light as their energy cores reached maximum capacity. The Leviathan, sensing the shift, turned its attention to him, its eyes narrowing as it began to charge, its massive form bearing down on him with deadly speed. Trenton stood his ground, watching the creature close in. "This is for Earth," he muttered, his hand hovering over the detonation switch. The Leviathan roared, its jaws opening wide as it prepared to unleash one final, devastating blast. But just before it could strike, Trenton pressed the button. The battlefield erupted in an explosion of light and fire as the Artemis platforms detonated in a chain reaction, the force ripping through the Leviathan's body, tearing it apart from the inside out. The blast was so intense that it vaporized everything in its path, a blinding column of energy that pierced the night sky and illuminated the ruins of the fortress. For a long, blinding moment, there was nothing but silence. When the light finally faded, the Leviathan was gone, reduced to a smoldering crater where it had once stood. The battlefield was quiet, the alien threat obliterated, but at a terrible cost. As the remaining soldiers regrouped, they looked to the place where their leader had made his last stand. Captain Harker's voice broke the silence, filled with sorrow but also a fierce pride. "Colonel Trenton, mission accomplished." The human forces stood together, battered and broken but victorious. They had faced the unimaginable and survived, and though they had lost their leader, they had reclaimed their world. The dust settled slowly over the battlefield, a field now marked by jagged scars, smoking craters, and the twisted remains of alien and human technology. The alien fortress was obliterated, its massive structure nothing more than molten rubble scattered across the landscape. And in the heart of it, where the Leviathan had met its fiery end, was a crater, still glowing faintly from the immense energy of the Artemis blast. Captain Renee Harker stood at the edge of that crater, staring down into the emptiness. Around her, soldiers, the survivors of what had once been a mighty army, gathered in solemn silence. They had witnessed the impossible, faced the unthinkable, and yet somehow, against all odds, they stood victorious. But their leader, Colonel Trenton, was gone. A voice crackled over Harker's comms. "Captain Harker, this is Command Center Omega. The alien signal has gone silent. We're receiving reports from across the globe. All alien forces have retreated. Earth. Earth is free." The words washed over her, and a murmur ran through the soldiers around her as they processed the reality. They had won. She should have felt relief, triumph, pride. But instead, she felt a hollow ache, knowing that the man who had led them here would never see the victory he had earned for them all. As she gazed at the smoldering battlefield, memories of Trenton flooded her mind. His unwavering focus, his relentless drive, the way he'd looked at every soldier under his command with a quiet respect. He had been more than their commander. He had been their rock, their resolve when hope seemed all but lost, and he had given everything. "Captain," a voice said behind her, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Carver, still limping from the injuries he'd sustained in the blast but alive. His eyes were red, and his face was etched with exhaustion and grief. He knew what he was doing, didn't he? Harker nodded slowly. Yes. He always did. He knew it would come to this. And he was ready. Carver swallowed hard, looking down at the crater. What do we tell command? How do we explain this? To everyone back home? Harker straightened, drawing in a steadying breath as she looked over the faces of her soldiers. The weary, resilient survivors who had followed Trenton to the end. They deserved to know the truth, to understand the gravity of what they had achieved and what had been sacrificed. We tell them that humanity doesn't bow, she said firmly. That when we were pushed to the brink, we didn't back down. We fought, and we won. The soldiers around her stood a little straighter, their eyes alight with a fierce pride. They had endured, and they would carry Trenton's legacy forward. Earth had been scarred, changed forever, but it had survived. And with that survival came the chance to rebuild. One by one, the soldiers began to gather what they could from the battlefield, taking with them the remnants of the battle. A piece of Trenton's armor here, a flag from a fallen tank there. These would become symbols, reminders of the resilience and courage that had led them through the darkest of times. As the soldiers prepared to leave, Harker took a final look at the sky, where the faint, dying embers of the explosion still lingered. It was strange to think that so much had been decided in those final seconds, that the fate of Earth had hung by the slimmest of threads. But thanks to Trenton, that thread had held. Hours later, at Command Center Omega, the transmission went out across the globe, to every screen, every broadcast tower, every radio frequency. Harker's face appeared, worn but strong, her gaze steady as she addressed the world. Today, we stand on the other side of an unthinkable battle. We faced an enemy that saw us as nothing more than an obstacle, an inconvenience. They underestimated us, believing that humanity would fall with little resistance. But they were wrong. Her voice was steady, filled with the kind of unwavering strength she had inherited from Trenton. We lost many, and we remember every one of them. Colonel Trenton led us through our darkest hour, and he gave his life to secure this victory. He taught us that resilience and courage are what define us. She paused, her eyes flashing with the fire that had carried her through every impossible fight. Let this victory be a message to the stars. Humanity stands united. We will not surrender. And if any others think to come here, know this: we will fight. We will defend what is ours, and we will prevail. As the broadcast ended, silence fell across cities, towns, and homes around the world. But that silence held something new: hope. Trenton's sacrifice and Harker's leadership had kindled a fire in humanity, a renewed spirit of unity and determination. And while they mourned, they also celebrated, knowing that from this battle, Earth would rise stronger than before. In the days that followed, as humanity began to rebuild, whispers of the battle spread. Tales of Trenton and the soldiers who had faced an enemy beyond imagination became legend. His name became a rallying cry, a symbol of Earth's unbreakable will. And as the stars burned in the sky above, the people of Earth knew they were ready, for they had stared into the abyss, defied it, and emerged victorious. And whatever lay beyond, they would meet it head-on, as one.